Hello from Australia. Richard Miller, never not here. Welcome as always. It's a sunny afternoon in December. What do you know? December summer. And life goes forward. Life moves on. We talk about so many things. We always talk about life in the end. And today I'm here with John Hale. So, John, welcome.
Thank you, Richard. It's good to be here.
Thanks for taking this time out of you're flying off now, so it's the perfect time.
Yeah, it fits my schedule really neatly, so thank you for having me here.
Life throughout the time we can remember. Life is practical and life is impractical. Yeah. And then those definitions kind of cross because we're not so sure. What we once thought was practical is not all that practical. Practical means, I guess, that it affects our life in a way, in a meaningful way, and in some releases something or gives us more freedom of movement and more freedom to relate. And so then we look for ways to release ourselves. Or we compare ourselves with others and say, well, they're more released than I am, or they're more fun, or they attract more friends, or more wealth, or they move around more. And then there we live. We live in that kind of movement, right? Coming and going with how we perceive ourselves. And even you interact with people that are on that same wavelength, where they're looking at ways to make life easier and make their objectives easier and make their interactions or businesses easier and more effective, right? So practical is a key word. You really have to say practical, or are the people that gather around you already have that one down pat and they're looking for that?
A lot of the people that I finish up working with are very focused on the practical. At one level, they want to be good, really good at practical things. So they want support, they want new ways, more practical ways to organize their lives, to create the experiences that they want to have in their lives. And then there are other people that have got to the point where the practical isn't working for them. And I like the way you paraphrase it, the practical and the impractical, because at a certain point on the journey, we don't want to be practical. The impractical allows us to move to another level of ourselves. And there are a lot of practical things we get taught when we're growing up, when we're little, that make things easier and practical for people, make things convenient, make things certain. And if we are really going to get in touch with ourselves in each moment, we have to kind of let go of that. We have to let go of those practical things that we've been taught and just allow ourselves to be with what is. And sometimes what is not particularly practical. It almost has a dysfunctional quality to it because we're so conditioned to be functional. And it's not till we start dropping our conditioning that we see how automatic and how practical we really are in our lives.
Well, it's probably a new way of being practical, right? Because practical to me means that it just somehow the rubber hits the road. In other words, it hooks up to our life. And so then the old ways of practical are somehow found to go around and not get any deeper, right? Because they're based on some kind of a premise that just is that's the ground floor of it. Yeah. Right? And so then let's just say, I don't know, can we say that people are looking for a new way or a new meaning of practical? You know, I want to change my life for sure, or I don't want to just live in space, you know, but I mean, so then please show me what grounding is, or how can I ground what I do in a way that takes a more immediate effect.
Yeah. As we're talking about this, I'm reminded of the Zen path, where when we first start going into inquiry, when we first inquire into the nature of ourselves and the nature of existence. And what happens is the mountain and the rivers are reversed. Everything's upside down. The practical world that we knew is completely topsy-turvy. And that once we go deeper into the experience of ourselves and deeper into the experience of life, and we have the awareness of that, then the world seems practical again in a new way. And certainly, in coming back to your original question, I operate really on two ends of a spectrum. I operate on the economic end of the spectrum, and I work sometimes as a strategist with large organizations, helping them work out where they need to be to maximize their potential as a group of people, delivering a product or a service to the market or to the world. And then way over on the other end of the continuum, I work in the sexual dimension. And often these areas are worlds apart in terms of our experience. And what I find is that I may well be working with an owner of a very successful business, and they have achieved mastery in their life in terms of financial mastery, mastery in their industry, they're a leader, but something about them is very dissatisfied. There's something not very practical happening around their life. And that when we go a little deeper into the lives of some of the people that I'm coaching, it's the area of intimate relationship, it's the area of their sexuality, where, it's a train wreck. So I'll come in this frame, and I'll finish up working with them in this frame. And
do they let the two mix? Because so many times in business, you can't even express your feelings, or if you do, you're out. If a man cries in a board meeting, are you kidding?
Yes.
How do they let that mix?
Well, it's almost like we have this split personality, as you're describing, and oftentimes I find in workplaces that people get to the door at the start of the day and they leave any reference for them real self behind, and they go into the organization. And I remember doing some work with a large organization around here in Australia, large by regional standards because we live in a regional area here. And this organization had some 550 employees. So in the regional area of New South Wales, that's quite a large organization by regional standards. And we were doing a trust exercise. And one of the women in the group shared that she lost her sister to breast cancer 3 years prior. And there was a 3-year battle around supporting her sister through her journey, and eventually her sister died. She had a co-worker who shared the same physical space with her for the last 10 years, but she had no idea that her work colleague had a terminally ill sister for 3 years, and that for the last 3 years she's been grieving the loss of her sister, yet a work colleague who thought she was very close to had no clue that was going on in her private life. So it was almost like this person was able to keep work and life outside of work very, very separate.
Let's just say there's a corporate wall. There's a corporate law. It's verboten, even to get close to that wall. Yes. And so then, I don't know why, because you might have to fire that person or something, or why. But anyhow, that's just the nature. Because like you said, okay, you work in two areas, sexual and finance. Well, finance is heavily contextual. It's built on an economic system and a way of doing business, and a way of hedging your bets, and certain markets, and all kinds of banking protocols, and the way they adjust for inflation and for a recession by changing interest rates and maybe adding to the money supply, and so many things are just all very arbitrary, but it's the way we do it. Mm-hmm. And then I suppose in the other personal realm, there's context of how we agree marriage and stuff should be, but really there's no context, right? It's wide open. Mm. And too bad you can't change the context in the financial.
Well, it's interesting to bring up marriage, because if you think about economics and sexuality, one could ask yourself the question, where does marriage sit on that continuum between economic and sexual? And in a romantic sense, it probably should sit on the sexual end of the dimension, of the perspective. But most of the marriages that occur in the world have an economic imperative to them, particularly in the East, in terms of dowries, particularly in terms of which social strata, which socioeconomic we marry into, family members often have an opinion about people marrying above or below their economic class, out of sight of, traditional structures or religions or whatever. So I kind of see marriage as a construct that sits more on the economic end of the spectrum, and that this experience of our true sexuality is, in most cases, is a long way from marriage. And marriage is more of an economic contract.
But yet we don't have to have any kind of like preferences. We don't have to really say, well, marriage should be this way or should be that way. Let it be economic, right?
Well, I'm saying when I go into the world, I do quite a bit of work with people at various stages of relationship. They may be wanting to get into a marriage, or they're coming out of a marriage, or they're getting married again, and they're wanting to clean up their shop because they realize that when they go into the next marriage, they get to take themselves with themselves. So some of the problems with the ex are going to reappear for them unless they can go into the next one with awareness. And it was interesting. I had to go to a function recently. I couldn't find my cufflinks, so I had to go down to the men's store in the town where I live. And I went into the men's store, and I took a shirt with me that when I was married, I got married in the shirt. It was a dress shirt, and it had room for a bow tie, and it had room for cufflinks. So I had this nice dress shirt, and I took it in, and the guy who was selling me the cufflinks said, "That's a really interesting shirt. I haven't seen one like that for a while." I said, "That's right, because it's 20 years old." And we got to talking about marriage and as a sort of a way of being in the shop. And as he was bagging up the cufflinks and he was taking my money and processing it, he quite proudly said, of the 10 people that I went through, my mates that I went through school, and we did football clubs together, and we did our TAFE colleges, and we did things together, I'm the only one out of the 10 guys I went through who was still married. And he was quite proud of the fact that he'd been able to keep this thing called marriage together. And he quite proudly said, "It's because we work on it." I said, "That's great." And he talked about his children and how he kept his world together. And as I went to go out, I just asked him a question. I said, "So how is marriage?" And he said, "Well, I'll tell you what, it wouldn't work if I couldn't have my annual trip to Melbourne." In other words, there was part of his true nature in relation to his sexuality. He needed that freedom just to allow the sexuality to move into other places outside of his marriage. And he said that was the secret to a successful marriage, was his ability to go outside of his marriage sexually. And I asked him, I said, "Does your wife know about the other women?" And he said no. So often this is an unspoken part of a successful marriage, is that if we look really hard at statistics and we look at what isn't said, it's a significant thing. It's a significant part of the experience for people, is that we have created this economic structure called marriage, and we have certain expectations we place on ourselves around that. And it's not our maximum potential. It's not our true nature. It's something come from the economic end of the spectrum, and that's why these people that have achieved success in the economic sphere, they're still hollow. They haven't realized their sexual potential. They've realized their economic potential, but they haven't tapped into this. So I get to work right across this continuum, and it's fascinating.
Well, what I'm noticing lately is kind of like any kind of barrier or numbness translates to all parts of your life. So then if that guy's wife in your example doesn't know what he's doing, of course, then they have a very, comparatively, shallow relationship, because there's many true things that they're there's many withholds, let's say, and so then somehow it can't go very deep, I mean, the depth is maybe the satisfaction in their children, or, the satisfaction of creating a beautiful home, or the satisfaction of entertaining, or something like that. Those kind of satisfactions are there, but the true self-discovery that you get with a true friend would probably be missing.
Yeah. And that's the point. This is intimacy, when two beings are able to be completely honest with each other, then we have intimacy. And I find that quite rare in the ongoing pairing of men and women in society at large. There are some beautiful exceptions to that, but by and large, there's a script, and there are certain expectations that religion and family and one another brings to that dynamic. I was talking to my partner yesterday about this very subject, and we were talking about her sexuality, and we were talking about my sexuality, and we were sharing quite frankly that she energetically, she could handle far more than one man in her life, but emotionally she doesn't want more than one. But for her, at this point in her life, I'm it. So in a way, she energetically, as a woman, she has the capacity to just go and go and go and go and go and go sexually, whereas men, it tends to be a fairly short-lived experience. But for women, it can just extend and extend and extend and extend. So in that way, she's honest with me in terms of what her experience of her sexuality is, and I'm able to hold the space for her to share that. So
as a man, you know, that kind of honesty might not be too easy to take, you know, like, I mean, you might even know it, you know, you might totally know it, but then just to have it reinforced and saying, but I want one anyhow, you know, well, great consolation, right?
Yes.
And then, I don't know, like we were talking about having a true friend and really finding yourself mirrored in that true friend, but is that going to be always best in a man-woman relationship, or is that going to be, you know, women go out together? I don't have any clue of what women do together, you know. They talk a lot, it seems, from the outside, but I don't know. But men, I've never really hung around too much, you know. I haven't liked them too much, you know, I guess. Or we're so damn competitive, or, you know, I don't like this, the rote way that we, you know, there are these men's groups, and it's a movement that's happened for ages, and I've just never got involved with it. I mean, when I am in some kind of a co-educational, we'll call it, group, I always do enjoy talking with men and even giving them a hug and stuff. I never think of that as any kind of sexuality, or even with the women, I hardly think of sexuality anymore, so I don't know. I'm kind of like backed off of all of that, right? But as far as a true friend, how does that happen? Can it happen with a mentor? Can it happen with an uncle? Can it happen with it can't really happen with a business associate, right? Because somewhere you get the nuts and bolts get really tight and kind of pops.
I told that example before of the two women because I was quite shocked when I heard that. You know, I have an experience when I work in organisations that women do share from the heart one with another, and there's often quite a bit of support for their real life outside of the organisation. So this was kind of, I think it was more like an exception, but was quite rare in terms of what I'd seen. This organisation was it was a government-based organisation, so it had a lot of rules and a lot of structures and a lot of hierarchy and a lot of behavioural standards or implied standards. I think a true friend can be anywhere. A true friend can be a child, your own child. A true friend could be your parent. A true friend could be another man. And what I find in the last 5 years, particularly, I run a monthly men's group, and often men will come to that group when they don't have a true friend. And there's probably 200 men come through the men's group in the last 5 years. And some men keep coming back each month, and some come for a little while to sort out things, but they come to find a friend. And the purpose of the group is to allow the men to start expressing their truth, to actually start sharing the truth of their lives. And oftentimes what they say, in the company of men, they actually feel comfortable sharing their truth, and they learn to speak truth again, speak their truth in the company of men, because it's safe. And then ultimately, as they strengthen that muscle, that truth-speaking muscle, they can go back into the world and take a few risks and start to speak the truth, because very few people speak anything like their real truth in their life. They're concerned about all sorts of issues.
Yeah, I noticed, you know, just on the streets when they had in the U.S., they had the Occupy movement in a lot of cities. And somehow the stated goal of that group was not to tell the truth. It was to express yourself or express what's not working. And then it was kind of blaming, you know, there's a certain amount of blaming to it, because they said the 99%, which left out the 1%, right? So those guys were out of it. And but I noticed that there was some kind of like, it was easier when they were holding that space. There was somebody down there 24/7 holding a space, and it was easier to share a truth, you know, to talk with anyone. And when they left that space, I could really, really, really feel the difference in the whole city. You and not just down in that square either, all over, everywhere in the suburbs. And so then, you said some of the men maybe are coming to your group because they want a friend, but it's, in a way, it's relative, they want a deepening, right?
Yeah. They're coming to, at one level, they want to talk to someone, and in the process of sharing with another, a new friend, they find a deeper aspect of themselves. So it's this experience of sharing with other people that helps us find our way home. In a lot of cases, as we pointed out, often in the corporate world, sharing is not something that is necessarily encouraged or rewarded. And we've seen some examples, particularly in the Wall Street marketplace. It's very sort of dog eat dog, and great risks get taken because people don't share information, or they deny the truth and they go after a short-term result without any long-term view. And that's the other challenge we have with corporations, that corporations exist on a quarterly or on a fairly short time horizon in terms of results, particularly CEOs. If they don't produce positive quarters, quarter on, or a dividend to shareholders, irrespective of what's happening in the marketplace, then they're out. And it's not sustainable, and we've seen that. And that's obviously what that was all about.
Oftentimes I had experience with smaller companies, where the owner was the boss. But even there, I would say that, they maybe could have long-term goals because they could do whatever they want. But still, they didn't really have any friends because everybody really was trying to manipulate them in one way or another, ingratiate themselves, and everyone wanted to hit them up for some reason, do my program or spend money on me, and so then, in a way, they're very isolated people.
Yes. I work with a number of CEOs, a number of managing directors, owners of businesses, and they typically range from staff from anywhere between 50 to 500. So these are smaller businesses. And I become their friend because they don't actually have a true friend within their organization. And often their spouse is at them because they're spending too much time in the other family, which is the organization. I do quite a bit of work with owners of family businesses who are sometimes second or third generation owners of a business. And sometimes they don't even want to be there. They said, son, you're my only living limb. You're going to take over this business. And they know the business because dad ran them through the business. Or if they're a daughter, dad ran them through the business. But, that's not their maximum potential. It's they've kind of locked into this family model of keeping the family business alive. And they can be very unhappy, and they can form all sorts of weird addictions just to cope with that. And they don't have any friends in the business. So often I find myself being a friend for them. And it's quite interesting to have a peek into different people's lives, particularly these people at the top. And I like working at the top because as the owner or the CEO or the leader of the business starts to become more aware and starts to become more self-responsible, it tends to filter down because most people bring their parental dynamic to their workplace. And oftentimes when organizations are hiring senior managers or staff, I'll say to the hiring manager, see if you can elicit what this person's relationship with their father was like or is like, if you're a male hiring someone, or if I work with businesses where they're all women owners, and I suggest to the women, see if you can find out what this prospective new employee's attitude to their mother was. Now, there are laws in this country that says you can't ask direct questions like that, but you can elicit by asking them to tell a story. And what I find time and time again is that when we understand the parental orientation a prospective employee has or a manager has towards one or other or both of their parents, that will actually determine what level of personal issue will have to be handled, and whether that person can be a true friend or not.
Probably the companies don't really want a free person, They want someone that's got a parental dynamic that says work hard and long, right? And
right.
And accomplish a lot,
Yep.
right? And then the more you're hung up with that, the more interesting you are as a prospective coworker.
And that's changing. I mean, in the early days, we saw companies like 3M, if you remember them from the United States, a very innovative company. They would give employees 6 or 7 hours a week free time, where they could just go and muck around and create their own projects. And that's how they stayed so innovative. So those people got a chance to follow their dreams, create things that were fun for them.
Did they do that for a long time, or did that just did that outlive one manager or one CEO, or did they just crash all those programs after he left? And
well, I think you could probably assess that by the value of their stock price, because if we look into the United States, particularly over the last 120 years, there were 500 Fortune 500 companies, say 120 years ago. 2 of them are only still in existence, so 498 of them fell by the wayside. And the 2 companies that remain have stayed innovative. And 3M share price would ultimately be a reflection of its capacity to stay innovative. So this
we don't know if they stayed innovative, because in this kind of atmosphere, there's kind of like really 2 ways to make profit, and maybe only 1 way to make profit. And the 2 ways would be the traditional way is adding value and being innovative, and the second way, which is so pervasive, is to buy, swallow your competitors. And so most of those 500s got bought, changed their name, and usually the way that they stay competitive when they buy is they close the place, right? Or and they fire half the people.
Yes.
And then the bottom line looks good, better, and then the stock prices go up, and then the CEO gets a huge bonus.
Sure.
For doing his sword work.
Yeah.
And so that basically so much of our economic world is run by the sword now, that and the blood is all just the common man, right? And that's kind of like where we're lost, where we're really lost, because the institutions used to favor business because it was so important for the community, and now those same institutions favor business that's not important for the community. In fact, they threaten the community.
Mm-hmm.
And not only threaten it, maybe not so much in Australia, but sure, they've got some employees there, but all the old factories get closed, new ones get open only in places where there's no unions and and where they offer tax holidays.
Mm-hmm.
And really, the business is a threat to the community, because if you just wobble the wrong way, we're leaving.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the kind of business that we're in nowadays.
Mm-hmm. And that comes from the way we have, I was going to use the word evolve, but I won't use that word, the way we have separated ourselves from each other. That we teach our children that we have this intellect that we can develop. And for probably the last 100 years, we have set up an education system, particularly in the West, which is based around the Industrial Revolution. So reading, writing, and arithmetic. These things were taught to children, not intuition, music, dance, theatre. These were 2nd or 3rd or 4th string electives that you could do. These weren't primary aspects of education. So with reading, writing, and arithmetic, we were trained entire generations of people to be like cogs in a big machine. And I think that's when we lost the plot. We relied on this, and we disconnected from the heart. We disconnected from the creative center. And we've really overfed this vehicle. And it's not until we drop down collectively into the heart and we start to live more from the heart that these structures will start to come down. The world is very vertical in terms of the way we arrange things. We need to become more horizontal. We need to connect at the level of a one heart rather than a one mind, one world order.
It would be interesting to follow up, because I don't know whether it's just my happen chance or what. I've met a lot of people with kids and talked to some kids, and they're all in Steiner schools, Rudolf Steiner. And so then all the Steiner schools, it looks like most of the earlier education is all art based, and arts and music and creativity, and all that takes a certain amount of interest and a certain amount of yielding your attention to a project for at least a half an hour and not 5 minutes. In other words, if your basic art course was filling in a stencil, you could do it in a minute and pass the grade and then go on to play a computer game or have things move through real fast. But I see this Steiner school it would be interesting anyhow to follow up on these people that were educated in these schools and see what kind of lives they made, whether they're able to imprint that on the rest of the world, or whether it at least makes a difference in their own life and their own family.
I have some experience with Steiner. I have 4 children, and one of them attends a Steiner school here in Mullumbimby. And what was interesting about my daughter is that when she was 3 years of age, a doctor looked at her and said, she's got ADHD. I think we need to put her on this new drug called Ritalin. And I listened to this diagnosis from the doctor. I said, my daughter doesn't have ADHD. That's just a label you've come up with to match some drug company's prescription for behavior normalization. I said, my daughter is a happy child. She's in fact a dancer. That's what she loves to do more than anything else. And when you're running a mathematics class, dancing doesn't fit. When you're running an English class, dancing doesn't fit. And I said no. And against a lot of medical advice and a lot of suggestion from the medical profession, I let her be free. And yeah, she's a dancer. She just loves the theatre. And I know now that if she'd gone on that prescription for that drug, she wouldn't be anywhere near as healthy as she is today. So the Steiner School's been fantastic for her. And you mentioned before in the earlier years, they do a lot of art. And the philosophy is that they develop the creative side of the brain first. They don't worry so much about the logical side where you construct sentences and fit things into a sort of predefined order in terms of language. They let the creativity, the music, the art, all that sort of construction from the creative to the digital in terms of doing things with the hands. So they develop that capability first, and then they bring the traditional intellect, which traditional schools look at right from the word go. They bring that in later on, and the Steiner philosophy says that, and I can see her that she's far more grounded and far more balanced as a 15-year-old than some of her peers, and certainly her sisters and brothers.
Even her sisters and brothers.
Yeah. She's an independent. She's very independent. So the Steiner kids, in my experience, extremely independent. In fact, when she was much younger, I went around and I went to some Steiner schools and I looked into some of the classrooms and I just felt from my heart and from my belly, not from my head, I just felt these beings, and they were present and they were confident in who they were, and they had a sense of who they were. And when I went into some of the more religious schools, church schools, these kids looked more like robots. They looked more afraid of the system they were in. They didn't seem to have the same level of autonomy. They had less idea about who they were. They had less experience of who they were. So
you brought something, a third thing in there for me at least, because we often talk about creative and the two sides of the brain and the cognitive, but you said kinesthetic. She's a dancer, so then that's a whole third element, the body intelligence, right? It's not one of the sides of the brain. So then, does Steiner go for that too, or
absolutely,
how do we do that?
Absolutely, lots of dancing. In fact, if in a Steiner school, every student in the school does a class on a Friday, which is a movement class every week, once a week, for about an hour and a half. It's called eurythmy. So that's the kinesthetic. They're doing a kinesthetic class once a week, every week, from this high until they finish, right through. And I don't know if you remember Annie Lennox from a group called the Eurythmics. She's a Steiner. You asked me before, do we know of exact people? No, she was a Steiner student, and she took her love of eurythmy and she created a band called Eurythmics. And she's a fantastic performer, fantastic songwriter, fantastic human being. Very in the world. You don't often see women in the world like you see Annie Lennox. She's in the world, and it wouldn't be hard to show the path of her education and her development, linking through to the way she shows up in the world. She's passionate, she's vibrant, she's dramatic, she's very talented, and she does what she loves. She doesn't fit into the system. She would never sit inside one of these corporations. She wouldn't sell her soul for that, I'm sure.
You set up kind of like, in a way, a polarity, but not, you didn't mean it to be a polarity, but I mean, you said that we were talking about the business, or where you found your life, and how you interact with things, the business, the finances, and somehow bringing a new practicality into an organization that's there for a purpose and needs to work. And then you went to sexuality, which in a way, I mean, Is that our hormones, or is that something that's totally natural? That's our animal nature, or like we can't really control all those things, like those forces and those feelings and those urges and stuff like that. Maybe we can pick up some techniques and kind of like play with them for a while. But I mean, we're really not the author whatsoever. But there's so many things in between there that are just how we relate with people and how we relate with ourselves and how we carry the burden of the past, you know. Somehow the past is not here, but its effects seem to be here.
Mm.
And then we can call that all freedom or suffering or pain or anything in between, right? And the full, I don't know whether a whole human being has to be into all those different aspects, or whether somehow there's something some basic freedom and some basic presence that probably allows, I don't want to say success, you know, I mean a word like success, which just means fulfillment, let's say. Fulfillment in all areas of life.
Mm.
Must be, I don't know, I was saying presence, so whatever that is.
I characterize that continuum from economic to sexual quite deliberately, and I'll come back to that in a minute. And the other thing I talked about is the fact that as a humanity, we need to come from this highly developed intellect and drop down into the heart more. And I characterize the heart as being intelligent. If we follow our heart, our life tends to become a happier experience, a more fulfilling experience. So it's our capacity to drop into our heart. Because not all schools are Steiner schools, where they allow people to drop into these other centers. As a collective humanity, we've overfed the mind. And as a man, and having worked with men, what I find is that men tend to operate a lot from this center. They're quite mental in terms of the way they experience world, they classify the world, they go into the world, into the economic sphere. It's about logic, it's about strategy. And I myself did that. I went through and I did my schooling and I did my degrees, and I did 5 degrees, and I finished up with 3 postgraduate degrees. And I finished up with a Master of Business Administration. I got appointed to be a professor of an executive MBA program. So I went right to the end of that economic continuum, and I ran strategy for organizations. I advised corporations. And I realized that wasn't the whole piece. And I swung back this way. And it's the clients, it's the leaders of these organizations that took me there, because they said, we're not happy. We've got all this money, we've got all this success, but we're not happy in our intimacies. So I went back to find out what this sexual story was about. And for a man, not so much for a man, when a man's sexual center gets activated enough, that energy, rather than going out, which is traditionally what happens in the West, the average time for intercourse for a man is 7 to 9 minutes. Now for a woman, if she was allowed to, she could stay orgasmic for hours or days. But her sexual experience is very limited, because most men, 7 to 9 minutes, that's it. But if a man can learn to extend his ecstatic experience, his sexual experience, the energy in his sexual center can start to work its way up through his body, and he can come into his heart. He can start to feel, he can start to express feelings. But oftentimes for many men, if they're very, very conditioned in their mind, they can't get to their heart unless they can get through their sexuality. Their sexuality is their way into their heart. So oftentimes man will be, we talked about before, it's kind of instinctual, this drive, this basic drive for sex, which comes from this root chakra. But if we can stay long enough to share that energy, to cultivate that energy rather than releasing it, we can come up through our solar plexus, our sense of self, our identity, a sense of self-confidence we have about ourselves, and into our heart. And when a man allows that energy to come through, he has these feelings of love, deep love for everything, for himself, for the woman he's with, for the man he's with, whoever it is. And then eventually that energy can travel up, and he actually leave the physical body, leave this realm. And that's a man who's practiced that for a period of time. But the sexuality is kind of a way for men to come back into their heart, because I have a sense that women are already more in their heart, and that at this time in our history is that we have to embrace more of that feminine heart, and we're seeing it societally, that women are starting to, the qualities of the feminine are starting to assert themselves more and more in the way we relate to the world. Because if we don't, we're finished. The way we've been treating the planet, from this masculine mind, this corporate, from this economic mindset, we're going to destroy her if we don't come through.
You know, I've heard it said, this is okay, I've heard it said that the spiritual path, one guy, I guess there were shorter people over there, he said it was 13 inches. Mm-hmm. Right, there's the spiritual path. And so now you've got another one that's a good meter or more, But I mean, in a way, sexuality, even for a few hours, you can play with it. But I mean, why? I mean, if that's not your nature, right? Just so you could be fulfilling to somebody. You could try it a couple times, I can't stay in bed for hours. I mean, not that my body won't be sexual, but I'm just not interested, in being in bed for ages. And, I mean, I'm sure I tried it one time in my life, but not lately. Sorry, honey. That seems like, okay, like this part, the 13-inch path is more or less just stop knowing, when you start to realize that this world is such a mystery.
Oh, you're absolutely right. The longest journey a man can take is the journey from his head to his heart. And there are many different ways to get there. Meditation can allow a man to drop from the mind into his heart. Ecstatic dance can do that.
Chanting and stuff like that.
Can do that.
Yoga practice,
breathing, psychedelics, all sorts of different ways in. What I've explored, because the way I'm wired, is that I've looked to see the potential for the sexual path, to see what the value was in that. And so my journey into my heart has come from a number of ways, but one has been the sexual path, another has been meditation and inquiry, and also being around teachers who know who they are, have had the experience of their true nature, and are able to reflect back more of my true nature to me. So I've kind of tackled it three ways, and it's been a slow 13 inches. It's been a really slow, a little bit at a time. So I've approached it from a number of angles. It's we are very, very, very repressed sexually as a society. We only have to look across to another species of distant ape relative, a bonobo, for example. And they, genetically speaking, and I know you're into genetics, they are more similar to us than an African elephant is to an Indian elephant. And they're the only primate that makes love or has intercourse face to face, looking into each other's eyes. And they actually tongue kiss these bonobo apes. But what's interesting about them is they don't run a vertical system of relating. They have a linear orientation. So there'll be a group of bonobo apes that will live together in a particular area, and they have a polyamorous relationship. So they're all in love with each other, and they enjoy their sexuality without any fear or any repression. And what happens is when one group of bonobos comes to a new group that they haven't seen before, the females actually meet and they rub their genitals together and they get very excited. And once all the females are happy, then everybody gets happy, and it's basically an orgy. Everybody just has fun. And that's how they live. And they never hit each other. There's no violence in that community whatsoever. Now, there's only a few of them left on the planet. There's only a few thousand. They live in the Congo, and ironically, they live in part of Africa, which has seen the most violence.
Wow, that's so unique, because we always think that the bull, or the lion or something, there's always there's the alpha male, right? And he knocks all the other males out and he takes all the women, right? And so then, in most of what we believe or have seen, that couldn't be, right? We're just used to the alpha male. And, listen, I want to see if I can get a confession out of you or something like this, because, okay, there you told a story about, your partner and you, and, her admission that, she has a lot of horsepower, on certain fronts, and that, but she still likes you. And, but anyhow, you both experimented here in this, with these energies, right? And so then, sounds like dangerous, stay away from women that know about Tantra, because they're going to be demanding. So then there's something about our hormones that push us together and that automatically fire us up when we see certain things, right? Mm-hmm. And it's like it's not us, though.
No.
It's the species, right?
It's an instinctual part.
And so then we're just serving the species then, right? And at another time we could serve the family or serve our country.
Mm-hmm.
And that's not us either, because that's not really our awareness or who we are or our freedom, right? We're just serving a group.
Our instinctual behavior, our socially learned behavior,
yeah, right.
Or our national identity, yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So then it seems to me that, in our culture, the alpha male, the winning male, has got a lot of beautiful women. Mm-hmm. And so then he would be wanting to be a good sex partner.
Yes.
Right? So he could get a lot of beautiful women, right? Mm-hmm. And so then even that comes out of neediness, right? Mm-hmm. Because why do I have to be an alpha male? I'm pretty happy being just a clunker myself.
That's great.
And so then
being happy with who
it's
you
a
are.
long route, to say, okay, I talked to a couple of Tantra coaches, and we really never talked about Tantra because maybe I'm not interested, or I'm thankful that I'm not, because it leaves me so much time. How much of society, everything of society is about go getting another girl, especially when you're a teenager and when you're growing up, and it's all a pecking order of who mates well, right? Mm. And then it never works out. Mm. Mm. And all those Tantra coaches, basically, I mean, their wife is, they're on their fourth one, right? And even the ones with the kids are gone, right? So that it's not really good for a relationship or any kind of stability. Maybe stability is not needed. It's only needed for tender parts of a family or something like that. Or I don't know. I mean, I'm bringing up a lot of points there.
These are great questions, because I'm sure these are questions that people at home think about, but often don't talk about because it doesn't fit with the world view that they have for themselves. What I like to share around that is, if you could peel back your experience and say, okay, if there was no religion in the world, what would be possible? And what I discovered in putting together a book that I've written recently is that there in the South Pacific, there are a number of islands that the Roman Catholic Church missed on the map when they brought the message of God Almighty and Jesus Christ as Savior to all the indigenous people on the earth. And there's a group of people that lived on these island archipelagos about 400 kilometres north of Port Moresby, northeast. And they lived in sustainable community, and they weren't touched by the Catholic Church. And in about 1920, a British anthropologist went there to study the way these people lived. And what he noticed was that the children lived in their own village. They had their own place where they played and they swam and they fished, and they just had they had a children's village. And then there was this area where the more adults, the teenagers and the adults lived. And what he noted was that the children, from about the age of 4 through to about the age of 10, they experimented sexually quite freely with one another. And the natural way was for a boy to be attracted to another boy. It's like, okay, you have the same apparatus, you have the same sort of energy as me. What's that about? Because there were no rules, there was no right or wrong, there was no sin, there was none of that. There's no one to punish them. They just had their freedom, their sexual freedom. The initial attraction for a boy, and not sometimes a girl, but often for a boy, was to connect in a playful and a sexual way with another little boy for a fairly short period of time. And once they got confirmation that yours is the same as mine, it operates the same as mine, they said, wow, now let's have a look at the little girls. They're different. And they spent a long time trying to understand how the girls worked, because that was very complicated, a lot more complicated for them. But what was interesting, from the age of about 4 to 10, that all of those kids had a chance to explore their sexuality one with another in this little village, unobstructed, without any ideas about right and wrong imposed on them around their sexuality. By the time they were 12, they paired for life. And they stayed together. So once they got to the adult village, they paired for life, and they stayed together. They had children if they were having children, and they stayed together for the life. And when this anthropologist interviewed some of the older members of the community, the thing they remember most heartfelt and most passionately was their childhood. Everybody universally remembered it as the most beautiful time of their life. And what I took from that was that polyamory is our first potential. Monogamy is our second potential. And here in the West, we've got that completely screwed up. We understand that there is a potential for people to be friends, to be true friends, and be in a monogamous way with each other. But we've stopped people exploring their polyamorous potential. And we keep them safe. We keep them in their virginal state.
Yeah, we try to keep them as
until they're married, and then we allow them, we set them free with their sexuality, and we say, by the way, we're now giving you your ticket to freedom, but you can only have sex with one person. When instinctively they have these drives that want to explore and find out. Yeah,
ideally it would be just one person forever, right? Because you're supposedly platonic until you're married, and then you're married for life. So
according to our conditioning.
Well, I mean, that's what they're putting out. Like, it doesn't sound all that attractive, right? Like, you can't learn from your mistakes.
Well, I mean, in a lot of the Muslim countries, you have no clue. You have no clue who you're going to marry. Your parents have already sorted out. It's an arranged marriage. There's no personal choice in that. What I loved about
they can have more than one wife.
They can too. Yeah. What I loved about this community is that they didn't have any religion. They didn't have any notion of a supreme being that had some power over them. The Catholic Church found out about the way these people lived in the 30s and 40s, in the 1930s and 40s, and they sent missionaries very quickly from Rome to sort these savages out. And bear in mind, this community had no word for virgin. There was no virtue associated with the word virgin. They didn't understand it. Conceptually, it wasn't even in their vocabulary. It had no importance whatsoever, because everybody was in this sexually free way as a child. When Rome came, what they basically did was said that what your children are doing is bad, stop it. And what happened is that within 10 years, violence appeared in inter-island relations between men and women. There was no violence, there was no anger, because the quality of sexual expression in the past didn't allow that. But when we started to oppress people's naturally occurring sexuality, violence arose. What they did was they brought in some Australian mediators to teach the men how to play cricket. And when the men learnt to play cricket, the anger that they had, which was just their repressed sexuality, was taken out hitting a ball around a field, which was much more civilized. But they stayed repressed, they stayed angry, they stayed susceptible to ill health and disease because they weren't able to reach their potential as a child.
Can they reverse that? Because can they ever go back, or are they somehow not innocent anymore? Or, you know what I mean? Like somehow they can realize that, oh, this is just the church operating in me now. Let's just loosen up here.
Well, it's a great question, and my daughter recently came back from Vanuatu, and again, it's another South Pacific community that has had Christianity plonked into it in the last 200 years. And what I see is these people are basically happy. That happiness is our natural state. We don't need to believe in something or earn a certain amount of money or belong to a certain group to be happy. It is our natural state. But when we go looking for it outside of ourselves, that's where we create problems for ourselves. So when the Christian missionaries came into these South Pacific countries, they basically said, you're happy, but if you want to stay happy, you need to believe in a God. You need to believe in Jesus Christ because Jesus loves you. And they said, oh, well, if he loves us, we love him because we love to love. So they saw Jesus as a friend, as a true friend, yeah? And the way they relate is quite different from the way we relate to religion in the West. But gradually, the mores, the rules are starting to come in. And my daughter came back. She said, there's a lot of Christians there in Vanuatu. She said, but they look very unhappy. She said, went to 3 marriage ceremonies. She said, they're normally very lively, but when they're forced to get married, they look quite somber. It's kind of like they've had to let go of part of their life. So they have ascribed to the Western model of marriage through a religious ceremony in a church. And she said that's when they seemed the least happiest, is that they were having to limit their experience of who they were within this system that they had originally said, oh, Jesus loves us, come on in, take over the way we organise our lives. So we missed something in bringing religion into those places. We really did, because they've got some secrets there that we here in the West need to tap back into.
So I was asking the question if they could reverse it or go back to where they were before they got Jesus, before they got guilt, let's say.
Yes.
And so then that brings to mind that certain communities tried to live in a more, create a commune, and also like a village of the kids, or also be raised by many aunts and uncles, where you're not so much just exposed to the neurosis of one man and one woman, but you would see everybody's neurosis, and maybe they would all kind of take less importance, and you'd see there's a lot more options, right? And
Correct.
then there was a certain amount of sexuality there too, and then there was a certain amount of belief in you're allowed to play with each other in many ways.
Yes.
And so then in a way they're trying to reverse it, see, because they're coming from the Western society, they're creating a commune, they're saying, here, bring your kids here, you can raise them here, and see what happens. And I've never really followed up on any of those people.
Yes.
In any great sense to see how did they turn out, I mean, did they have an easygoing life or not? At the time I brought my nephew there, and he didn't join for a long time, but he kind of like took the order, and he just kind of knew a couple of women there, young women. He was 16, right? Mm-hmm. And it kind of freed him from a lot of things that when I was 16, I thought, oh, I was so scared of it until I was 26 or even later, I mean, and I made some, mistakes, and it just didn't seem like to be a topic. It was just kind of like a thing that was totally repressed. And then when you were given the keys to the kingdom, nobody told you where to stick the key or how to turn it on, right? Or what to do with it.
Yeah.
And that's just not able to discuss it. So that this guy developed very quickly and much more than his co-friends, his friends of those ages, an ease with girls, right? Mm-hmm. And I thought that would be a great freedom, but in a way it didn't really work for his life too much. Now he's in his 40s, and I think he's, just to say it didn't really work. It's not a cure-all. Mm-hmm. He got involved with a lot of girls, and he was always in the and it got him, so he went for the beautiful ones. And it got him in the fast lane, and then there was a lot of drugs and stuff, and he did a lot of dealing, and then he used his body very hard, and always had good women, and lots of them, and never could keep a relationship, and was thrown out of, from seeing his child, and I don't know. I don't think he's really any better off now than he was. It's been a long way to. And, it's not an automatic freedom, so then maybe you can't reverse it, I'm not so sure.
I'll come back to what your question around reversal, because I can see at one level your friend was really trying to break out of this conditioning. And what's interesting, at the stage of life that he was doing it, he understood he wasn't happy, so he was going for happiness outside in these women, yeah? So instinctively, he's on. He's like, okay, I can find more of myself in the process of making love one with another. That's absolutely true. We can release our neurosis. We can release our rigidity. We can loosen our body armor by making love one with another. That's Wilhelm Reich showed us that in terms of the work.
Are we just shooting that neurosis at the other, or are we actually releasing it and knowing that, or do we have to know the difference?
So at an instinctual level, that's true. But he got to take his personality with him to those various relationships. And that's kind of probably where he got unstuck with it, because you mentioned that he took drugs as well. So we tend to go looking for these drugs of addiction that aren't particularly healthy for us because we can't be with the emotions that are arising. And when we start moving sexual energy in the middle of our life, all sorts of stuff comes up. Grief, sadness, sorrow, pain, all sorts of emotions get activated when sexual energy starts moving through the system and our armor starts to loosen up. We have to start experiencing all the things we pushed down and repressed and denied. So there's a lot of stuff that can come up once we get activated sexually. And if he wasn't able to be with what was arising, his mind got busy judging that. And it isn't hard to judge ourselves if we take the standards, so-called standards for what's acceptable out of religion, out of society, what the government says is and isn't allowed. We take those standards and we internalize them. We can give ourselves a really tough time. And then if we're exploring our sexuality and we're already in a defined relationship, and our friend or our wife or our husband also subscribe to those rules, then we can feel persecuted by them as well. So it can be very dangerous territory socially, personally, if the person's going into that period of sexual liberation without any awareness. It can be very dangerous. If they can go in with some awareness, that experience can be one with awareness, then the journey can be more enlightening, can be more healing for them. The risk is that this dynamic between wanting freedom, repressing it, wanting freedom, repressing it, can just get into this vicious cycle. I can't create it with this woman. I'm going to try and create it with this person, and they're never able to break it. In the immediate, but in 5 years' time or in 10 years' time, your friend might have a realization of what was going on. But if he's still addicted and he's not able to get support around expressing his emotionality,
in a way, he's addicted to changing women, right? And always getting a good one, right? And thinking that matters.
So he's operating from an idea of what that is, and he's probably seeking some sort of validation for himself in that. And it's kind of like I was sharing before with my partner, is that psychologically she feels very happy with one man, with me. Energetically, she knows she could be with 100, right? For men, in a kind of way, it's a little bit different. It's kind of like, energetically, we've only got the energy to keep maybe an eighth of a woman going, really. But psychologically, we need lots so that we can feel alpha and important and dominating.
And we got options.
We got options, yeah. And we don't have to feel the pain. So psychologically, men often need many women to feel good about themselves. But women only need one man to feel good about themselves. And energetically, we're only good for, one shot or two shots in a day, or how many shots we can muster up. But she's available for as much energy as available. Her energy is endless. A woman who's in tune with her sexuality can go and go and go. So again, it's this paradox between the masculine and the feminine. The sex and love, women avoid men that want to hit on them the first date. If you love me, then you'll wait. But men don't fall in love unless they're met sexually a lot of the time, unless they deny their essence. So it's quite an interesting paradox in terms of the way we play that out. In terms of going back, can we reverse it? Yes, we can if we do it with awareness. If we have enough awareness when we go into that, we can reverse it. It's the same old adage. It's like most of our conditioning and our personality is done by the age we're 7. The Jesuits said, give me a child until he's 7 and I'll show you the man, I'll show you the adult. So it's our early childhood conditioning that really sets us up. It sets up the way we're going to process who we are, one with another throughout the life. And
a couple of times you've said with awareness. If you do it with awareness, somehow there's freedom at the end of the tunnel. If you don't do it with awareness, then, who knows? It's just a more sophisticated kind of bondage.
Yes.
And then with awareness, I suppose we all think we're aware at this moment, right? And then tomorrow we say, no, I wasn't too aware then. Now I'm more aware. And so then what's the benchmark? What's the relativity? What do you do with awareness? You know what I mean? What's the benchmark? There is no benchmark, because each day the awareness is what it is, right? And then, so then each day we're moving ahead and thinking, well, I've got awareness, I'm moving carefully, and maybe we're not.
So awareness is our capacity to be a supreme observer of the way we are. And you shared before that I realized tomorrow that I wasn't as aware today as I thought I was. So that shows that you have awareness. As you reflect back, you say, I wasn't as aware. So that shows me that from yesterday to today, that your awareness has become a little bit more expanded. That you're recognizing there's a certain amount of awareness present. And then there was another moment where there was a realization. And awareness is something that comes if we are able to come more and more into the moment. It's a practice of being here now. It's a practice of speaking our truth in each moment. Because if we don't speak our truth, we're not giving the awareness the information it needs to expand. Daring to share whatever's going on inside. Whatever we're feeling, whatever sensations, whatever thoughts we're having. Being able to share that with a true friend. And you said before, I'm going to be looking for a confession. Yeah? And in a kind of a way, the Catholic Church had it right. You know, confession was a great way to bring awareness. When we go to confession, it was an opportunity to bring awareness to what we've been doing. So I wouldn't throw the baby out with the bathwater in that respect. But oftentimes, confession in the church was, I've broken one of the cardinal rules, or I thought about having sex, or whatever. So oftentimes the confession was around the structure. But the act of confession, the act of actually speaking the truth, moment to moment, daring to share what's really going on, invites a much more expanded sense of awareness. Easy to say, harder to do.
I got this question bobbling around in me. I've never asked it before, and I suppose maybe it's to bring up this subject. Maybe it's useful for someone, but maybe it's just stupid for two guys to talk about women, because I don't know anything about women. But I mean, so sometimes a young woman grows up in such an exquisite way, you know. Seems like she's so soft and so beautiful, and so somehow she fits in with all the ideals too.
Mm-hmm.
And then in that sense, from many points of view, she becomes an object.
Mm-hmm.
And then she finds that objectivity is something she can really trade in, and just somehow really be a model,
yeah,
or be an actress, or just be attractive to a lot of older men that are damn rich, even,
yeah,
you know.
Sure.
And then there's a lot of prizes there. But
on the economic spectrum.
Well, that's right. That's the danger of it. See, but I mean,
may or may not match up on the sexual dimension.
Well, let's just say, because like, maybe these women come from a place that have been denied economically, especially, you know, and the ones that are really, you know, in a rich family, they probably don't really have to capitalize on this objectivity. And then those that capitalize on it, they're usually probably surprised in a negative way, because like here we're big men, you know, and we rent a fast car, and we say, hey, we paid the rent, we're going to drive the hell out of it, right? And then we're going to park it in our garage, and nobody else is going to see it, you know. And so then I've heard so many stories of women that are restricted and not free, and they're treated like property, right? And so then what to do, you know? And usually a woman that's really that fits that class, I've always looked away from and steered away, because I thought, I don't want to get involved in that. First of all, I don't want to pay the price of the object, you know, and second of all, I don't want to be in that dynamic, you know, and I'd rather take one that just looks normal. And I don't know, maybe I reacted too, so, but I don't know, can two guys talk about something like that, or is it just ridiculous?
It's not ridiculous, and I think in your question, you have the answer in your question, and it's about ownership. You said, oh, I'll take that one, or I'll take this one. And there is a sense that the men have got to a point where we take a woman as a possession, or as, maybe not a possession, but something we have a sense of ownership around. And women are conditioned that way as well. They have been conditioned to be owned as well. And this is part of the patriarchal culture that we live in. And it's only been in existence for probably 6,000 or 7,000 years. And prior to that, we didn't live in communities where we own land. We lived in harmony with nature. We lived on the land. We lived in our environment, but we didn't own land. But the minute we started wanting to own land, and we believed in succession rights, we got invested in our ego. We believed we could own a woman so that we could maintain our succession rights. So this ownership thing is a big problem for us at a spiritual level.
You know, it's just coming to me. It's like it's either or, because those are economically successful. And you said that a lot of these business leaders that are doing really well, you know, they're questioning their sex life and who they are and so on. In other words, like, let's say that I was a rich guy, but I was actually very sexually competent. I would have this woman that everyone else thought was an object, and I would treat her like a queen. But also, I'd know she wouldn't go anywhere because I was sexually supremo, you know. But if I know that I'm sexually like, bleh, and then I gotta park her in my garage and restrict her movements, right?
Yeah. So every man is sexually you, right? Because in this model of reality, we're only offering a woman one man at a time. It's not her next maximum potential. So it doesn't matter how many cars he owns or what his bank account looks like, or whether he's been able to expand his orgasmic power so that he can go for 31 or 32 or 33 or 34 minutes, is irrelevant. She's always going to have the capacity to want more at an energetic level. So we've sold ourselves a story that we can be that one man energetically, sexually, and it's bullshit. It's just a myth. It's an absolute myth. And we've also sold it to the women because it suits women. Women don't feel safe if they're not owned in this world. And if you look at the way we've treated women in this world for particularly the last 2,000 years, a woman would be very, 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 I mean, that's changing now. We're seeing women able to be supported in the world without having to have an ownership model with a man. But traditionally, there's a lot of stuff built up in the psyche around that.
Is that just the men, though? Because, I mean, we go stone them, right? We stone the prostitutes, right? So then they're not safe from us. They're safe from themselves, right? We'd burn them at the stake.
Sure.
If they had any kind of psychic power or any kind of intuition.
Any intuition, if they were seen talking to each other. I mean, even today, if a Muslim woman is seen looking into the eyes, or two men get together and tell a story about a woman said, oh, she's had sex with this other man. If they just need two witnesses that can just make up a story, she gets stoned to death. She gets buried in a hole in the ground. And they pick these particular stones. They're about this big. So it creates a slow death. And they stone these women to death because they're just curious about their sexual potential. They just take a little peek from behind this burqa at a man and they're gone. They're just gone. And that's how fucked up we are in terms of the way we treat women.
God, we could just, I guess the solution is to pray, right? Let's just pray that women are free.
Yeah.
I don't know what.
Well, it's interesting. I did some research recently. 53% of women in your country, in the United States, masturbate with a vibrator. Women between the ages of 23 and 44. So you think about women in your country between the ages of 23 and 44, somewhere in their car, in their office, in their bedroom, 53% of them masturbate with a vibrator. Right? So I don't know the circumstances around that, but what that tells me is that more than half the women in the United States of that age group, the man they don't have is not enough for them. Energetically, they need to insert something else into themselves to feel full, if that makes sense. And in the bracket of women from the age of 18 to 22, that figure's 30%. So almost a third of women. You think about 18 to 22-year-old women in the United States. That our society is such that they can't get enough masculine energy meeting them, so they need to have an artificial device to create that level of pleasure for themselves. Well, that's not just a recent thing. That's been happening for a while.
Well, it would be whether you're one of those women or not. Listen, I don't know. Just please, I'm not going to do it. So find your way.
We'll toss a coin.
You know? But I mean, what to say? If society was open, and then we could find. People don't have to be having an orgasm all the time, but maybe once or twice they want to find out what the depth of it is.
Yeah.
And so then, let's have that be possible.
And for your male viewers out there, what I've discovered in terms of my work in the sexual area, which we haven't talked a great deal about today, but I've talked a little bit about it, is if a man's engaged with a woman for more than 32 minutes, the energy will actually move up to the point, and the fontanelle, or the crown cavity, will actually start to open energetically, so the etheric body will start to move. And it's possible for a man to actually start to move his center of his being beyond his body, actually has a chance to merge with the cosmos. And that's kind of nice if you're a woman hanging on for the ride, because that at least means you get a little bit more than 7 or 9 minutes worth. And men are like microwaves when it comes to sexuality. Women are like crock pots. You know, you can't cook a stew in 7 minutes. You can microwave anything in 7 minutes. So, you know, to the men out there, you know, if you can get yourself educated and get out of this sort of tension and release experience of your own sexuality, you're going to be more ecstatic. You're going to have a chance to really seek the freedom you want in your sexuality, and the women will probably throw their vibrators away and line up and say, "Hey, I'll try a real one, thanks."
I doubt it, you know. In fact, I'm going to become a vibrator salesman and say, "Let me out of the deal," you know. But I mean, okay, let's see. What are we saying here? Like, let's just know ourselves, you know, and know what's real, and then let it happen, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, John, we could talk about a lot of things, right?
Well, if I get a chance and you're still around in a week's time, I'll bring my partner in and we can do an interview together. And
oh my God, that would be great.
Would you like to do that? It would be fun. You could. She's great because she'll tell you a bit more about what it is from a woman's perspective in terms of this experience. And her name is Taryn. If she can be here, I'll get her here for us. So we'll check in with you. I'm about to have to catch a plane.
Yeah.
But when I get back, I'll send you an email and see if we can schedule some more time.
Okay, John Hale, I hope you enjoyed, talking about, we talk about a lot of things, and it's not all airy-fairy, and we don't all have to go to the zone and go out and get into the vastness, and that's not a solution for anything, because after we're out of the zone or when we get tired of it, here we are again, you know, and we're living with somebody, and we're kissing somebody and hugging somebody and telling them you love them, and so then why not talk about that too, so. Thanks for coming to Australia, guys and girls, and come again, you know. And thank you, John. It's really been a total pleasure.
And I want to thank you, Richard. And I was just thinking as I was riding in here to have this interview today that, you know, what we need to do on this planet is we need to come together in a more intimate way, one with another. We need to create this sense of community and let go of some of these structures that we talked about earlier in the interview. And this is what you're doing. You're actually bringing people together. And you're doing it online, which means you're touching, you know, the lives of thousands of people. So I just wanted to thank you for being here and really creating this opportunity for us to connect at a deeper level with each other. Thank you.
Thank you, John. You know, basically all I'm doing is I'm saying these are a lot of options. You know, let's get them out on the table and you guys decide. You know, and take your life wherever you want to take it, just for a try. You know, trial runs are free. You know, so. All right.
Yeah.
Okay, wonderful. Bye-bye.
Bye. Thank you.